In a little more than 24 hours, Trump will travel to China, escorted by billionaires, titans of American industry, the best of the best. This summit between Donald Trump and President Xi will not be remembered in the way that the administration would have us believe. It's likely to be remembered less as a diplomatic meeting and more as a transactional restructuring of the global order, a negotiation where symbolism, economics, power, and strategic concessions are woven together into one grand performance. These two, the most powerful men on earth, will sit across from one another, one representing a rising civilization state with expanding industrial, technological, and geopolitical influence, the other representing an aging empire still dominant militarily, financially, yet increasingly fractured internally, politically, culturally, economically, and psychologically. Why describe one as ascending and the other as descending? I submit humbly, yes, we have reached the turning point, the point of perhaps no return. Either we'll go forward, healed from the open wounds of past transgressions and reconciliation, failed reconciliations, I should say, or forever be caught in the trappings of white supremacy. Since the end of the Second World War, the world has largely existed beneath the aegis of American hegemony. The United States dominated militarily, it dominated global finance through the dollar system, it dominated industrial production, media, technology, and the architecture of, of international institutions. American culture itself became an export. Hollywood, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, fast food, music, and ideology flowing outward across the planet. But empires rarely collapse in a single dramatic moment, right? Nah. More often they erode through eternal contradiction. Today, America still possesses enormous strengths: military superiority, innovation, reserve currency status, elite universities, entrepreneurial dynamism, and unmatched cultural reach. Yet, beneath these strengths lies visible instability, political tribalism, institutional distrust, economic inequality, crumbling infrastructure, corporate extraction, performative, performative leadership, and the growing sense that the American project itself has become fragmented. Compounding this instability is the growing perception across much of the world that America has lost the moral high ground it once claimed after World War II. For decades, the United States presented itself as the guardian of international law, democratic norms, human rights, and a rules-based order. Whether fully true or not, that narrative carried immense soft power. Nations aligned with America not merely out of fear or economic necessity, but because many believed the United States represented a higher civic and moral vision. That, my friends, that perception has eroded dramatically. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan regime change operations, drone campaigns, indefinite military occupations, expanding surveillance systems, and the visible influence of corporate and defense interests have weakened America's credibility abroad. Increasingly, critics argue that Washington applies international law selectively, condemning adversaries while excusing allies when strategic interests are involved. Nowhere has this perception intensified more than in America's unwavering alignment with Israel during periods of escalating conflict in Gaza and the broader Middle East. Across large portions of the global South, America is increasingly viewed not as an impartial stabilizing force, but as a tyrant, as a participant in a regional power structure willing to overlook humanitarian devastation in defense of geopolitical alliances. International courts, human rights organizations, student movements, independent journalists, and even former Western diplomats have openly questioned whether the United States can continue presenting itself as the defender of a rules-based order while simultaneously shielding strategic allies from accountability. This has strategic consequences far beyond the Middle East. China and other rising powers increasingly capitalize on this perception gap. Beijing presents itself not as a moral crusader, but as a pragmatic actor focused on trade, infrastructure, development, stability, and sovereignty. Whether one accepts that framing or not, it resonates with many nations wary of Western interventionism and selective moral language. Thus, America's challenge is no longer merely military or economic, it is philosophical. A superpower can survive debt, it can survive political division, it can survive strategic setbacks, it can, it can, it can survive a government that regularly shuts down, caught in political turmoil of the day. But when a civilization loses confidence in its own moral legitimacy, and when the world begins to question the authenticity of its stated principles, its gravitational pull weakens. Empires are sustained not by force, but by belief. And belief, once fractured, is extraordinarily difficult to restore. Into this atmosphere walks Trump, not merely as politician, but as symbol. This is a very ill-advised meeting at this time, from my point of view. I believe in the calculations, the desire for media control, and the need for self-adulation, exaltation. He takes this journey. Trump reflects many of the contradictions of modern America. Celebrity over statesmanship, branding over philosophy, transaction over institution, performance over continuity. His critics view him as a narcissist and impulsive, a leader driven by applause, an image, than long-term strategic discipline. Even supporters often admire him not for coherence, but for disruption. The babbling idiot. Disruption itself has become the governing philosophy of late American power. And yet Trump also understands something profound about modern politics. Optics often matter more than structure. For Trump, the theater matters as much as the substance. Massive commercial agreements allow him to present himself domestically not merely as president, but as dealmaker in chief. Imagine the headlines: billions in aircraft orders for Boeing, expanded semiconductor cooperation, rare earth agreements, manufacturing commitments, and declarations of historic peace. Such optics fit perfectly within Trump's political language. Victory framed through transactions, numbers, applause, a spectacle. China, however, approaches the summit from an entirely different civilizational framework. Yes, they have the better hand here. Beijing's leadership does not operate primarily on 4-year cycles. It thinks in decades, generations, and historical continuity. Modern Chinese strategy is rooted not simply in military projection, but in patience, infrastructure, manufacturing, supremacy, technological leverage, and centralized national direction. China increasingly appears less interested in replacing America outright than in ensuring a multipolar order where American dominance can no longer obstruct Chinese expansion. This is where the summit becomes historically fascinating. A possible grand bargain begins to emerge. China offers large-scale purchases and economic stability, perhaps a olive branch with respect to the Middle East and Iran. Trump secures a public peace framework. Markets rally. American corporations celebrate. The financial press praises historic cooperation. Trump, Trump claims he prevented war and restored economic balance. The symbolism becomes powerful. American workers hear about jobs. Wall Street hears stability. Industrial America hears aircraft orders. Investors hear certainty. The public hears peace. Meanwhile, China quietly secures something potentially far more valuable: time, strategic space, and diminish resistance to its long-term regional ambitions. At the center of this equation sits Taiwan. Taiwan is not merely territory. It is one of the central pressure points of the 21st century. Technologically essential, geopolitically symbolic, economically critical, and psychologically tied to the legitimacy of Chinese reunification. For Beijing, Taiwan represents unfinished history. For America, Taiwan represents strategic containment. For global markets, Taiwan represents semiconductors, supply chains, and technological continuity. A transactional peace becomes conceivable, not immediate annexation, not dramatic invasion, but gradual inevitability. Under such an arrangement, China could receive tacit acknowledgement that the Taiwan question may eventually be resolved, primarily on Beijing terms, not through catastrophic war, but through economic gravity, diplomatic fatigue, negotiated ambiguity, and declining expectation of American direct military intervention. This may be the true strategic exchange. Commercial triumph today in return for geopolitical space tomorrow. From China's perspective, this would represent elegant statecraft. Why risk global economic collapse or military catastrophe if patience and leverage can achieve similar ends more cleanly? Trump, meanwhile, could present the outcome as masterful statesmanship. I stopped World War III. I can hear it now. I brought peace. I secured American business. I got America paid. Perhaps that's why he's going. He wants to get paid. I'm sure he'll get a nice extorted piece of the pie from all of the billionaires who will tag along with him. To supporters, that narrative could sound visionary. To critics, it may sound like the quiet recognition of a changing balance of power. The contrast between the two systems becomes increasingly stark. America appears driven by quarterly earnings, media cycles, ideological warfare, and elite fragmentation. Its corporations often behave as transactional entities, untethered from national cohesion. Its politics increasingly resemble entertainment. Public discourse grows louder, even as consensus weakens. China projects something very different: industrial discipline, long term infrastructure planning, centralized strategic continuity, national coordination, and collective sacrifice towards civilizational objectives. Even China's diplomacy increasingly emphasizes transactions with mutual benefit, infrastructure for influence, trade for alignment, investment for access. To many nations in the global south, China's proposition may feel less ideological and more practical. America often arrives speaking the language of values and allegiance. China often arrives speaking the language of roads, ports, railways, factories, financing, and development. We just can't seem to get away from that colonial system of days gone by. Hmm. In that sense, America allegiance can begin to feel rented rather than rooted, an apartment rather than a home. China's model, by contrast, presents itself as permanence, continuity, and strategic reciprocity. Whether this perception ultimately proves true remains uncertain. China carries profound internal risk of its own: demographic decline, surveillance excess, debt burdens, suppressed dissent, and the dangers inherent in centralized power. Yet history often turns not merely on perfection, but on comparative coherence. At this particular moment, China appears coherent while America appears divided. Economic historians may someday record this era as the moment when character and culture prevailed over spectacle and nostalgia, when strategic patience quietly outmaneuvered performative, when strategic patience quietly outmaneuvered performative dominance. Not necessarily the collapse of American power, not necessarily the triumph of Chinese power, but perhaps the formal emergence of China as a co equal center of global gravity alongside the United States. The summit then would symbolize more than diplomacy, it would symbolize acknowledgement. The summit then would symbolize more than diplomacy, it would symbolize acknowledgement. As I mentioned earlier, I do believe that this is a very ill advised moment for this meeting, for this summit. From my perspective, Xi is just too strong, too many cards. And Donald is weak, a willing traitor. He needs this. He needs a triumph. He needs a victory. And he needs to get paid. All these things he can do here and now or at the summit. I'm sure that Xi and his advisors have identified the table stakes. Who has the better hand? Who's the bluffer? Who sees the future strategically without the pressures and anxieties of the moment? I believe China will prevail in this end, in this moment. And Trump will be further weakened, though he will come back with his blustery and his performative narratives, dominate the media for several days. The die will be cast. Capitals all over the world will hear the readout. They will see and know who is weak and who is strong. They will follow with the reshuffling of the global order, allegiances, alignments. It will become clear who can be trusted and who cannot, who is a legitimate deal maker, at least for some period of time, and who bluffs. They won't call on the telephone, but they will call them by their actions. So, we shall see how Donald plays his hand. Who knows? Perhaps he has some magic left. Perhaps he can pull something out of his you know what. I doubt it, but we will know soon the outcome of this historic meeting. And history will record this moment as that moment in which China dealt the New World Order. Hey, I need you to do me a favor. It's a big favor. If you like the video, the content, any part of a word, a phrase, a thought, or the whole of it, please, I need you to like, subscribe, comment, or share. Any of those four will link or attach itself as part of the code of the algorithm. Once it's attached there, the algorithm searches the universe, the platform, for like-minded folk, and they become part of the community. And once it's there, that becomes part woven into the fabric of the consciousness of people like us and people like the people in the universe. And so let's grow. Let's add something to the universe. A good thought, a good deed, a good expression, a, a good will. So please like, subscribe, comment, or share. Now, if you don't like anything, there too, please let me know. That too becomes part of the algorithm. And I like to I like to engage. And so I like to grow. And so um help me grow. Thank you. Have a great day. Namaste. Satnam. And remember, every word I speak is not for everyone, but every word I speak is for someone.